For this podcast, we're going to be going over the Fifth Amendment today. But before then, I want to state about my Patreon. Anybody who donates, you'll see we have a few different levels. To start at $1, $10, $25, $50, and $100. I am on disability, as we know, with it. I've been trying to visit my fiance. I do have chronic vertigo, back issues. If we went over the back issues, I do have spinal fusion, where they had to remove the whole disc. And so there still is metal in the back that actually does cause a lot of limited mobility. That does have me on disability. I have OCD as well on top of that. So we're talking that does limit what type of work I can do. So I'm trying to work with this so I can get several types of streams of revenue. Currently, I'm not up to the level where I can get ads on my videos. So any type of, if you could subscribe to my videos as well, that would be a benefit, as well as if you could, this would directly give me revenue. For any patrons to my podcast would definitely help. That would be very, very generous for anybody who does want to help. I would very much appreciate it at any level. Even just $1 a month would be greatly appreciated. Later on down the road, I'm looking to add giveaways at the $50 and $100 levels, with it probably $25 as well. If there's enough at the $1 level, I'll add some of those with it, as well as the $10 as well. But it's going to have to be something to where I get enough people, and it's going to be something where I'm going to have to find where I get enough people in for this whole point. And you'll see where I'll add, most likely add different goals to where I hit. You'll probably see on my page. I don't know if you'll be able to see my goals or not, but I'll every time I hit a goal, I'll add a new one on there. I will basically, or every time I at least get close to a goal, I'll add a new one on there, and to basically hit, and that will basically to raise different revenue amounts for me to hit. That will actually aid to what I need to create some type of revenue for myself, as well as create some type of benefit for the people who are actually donating to me out of the kindness of their heart. Now on to the actual video itself. We've gone to the first four amendments, now on to the fifth. We would need to actually read it first to get an actual feel of the actual amendment. First part is, no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when actual services in time of public war or danger. Basically, unless we're talking in the rule of a military tribunal, which tends to have its own different rules. Basically, you're not held to answer for any crime whatsoever. You do not have to answer anything. This means that basically you should not be held to be forcibly to answer, and under any circumstance, regardless of what type of situation you're put into. This is where we get the idea of basically of being read your Miranda rights. Is basically under the Fifth Amendment, because you're not to be forced to answer for anything. And the next part we see, nor shall any person be subject to the same offense twice, be put in jeopardy of life or limb. Basically is you're not supposed to be charged with the same crime, same offense twice. This is why when you've already been proven innocent, they cannot recharge you. This is why when we see people, when we see an actual prosecution be very, very reluctant to charge someone, this is why when we look at from the aspect of, I know we'll see with victims, such as a family member with it that says, oh, we want this person to be tried. Well, if they know they can't get a guilty verdict without the full without reasonable doubt, then the fact is they're not going to charge them. And a lot of times families will say, well, we need to charge them, we want our justice now. Well, sometimes in these cases you can't do that, because if you can't prove your case, and it is on the prosecution to always prove the case. The defense doesn't have to prove anything. It's always on the prosecution to have to prove their case, as we see with the Constitution. The defense does not have to prove one bit. The prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense, all they have to do is basically, once they poke holes into any type of reasonable doubt, that's how they put up their defense. That's why we see this in this manner. That's why many smart prosecutors will be very, very reluctant to bring up charges on people. Then it says, nor be compelled in any crime case to be a witness against himself. This means basically you cannot force someone to basically testify against himself for any reason, regardless of what the reason may be. If you say, if you don't do this, we'll prosecute you and give you a harsher crime, you can't do that. Nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, this is even questionable as that with it, because if we look at the document, the Declaration of Independence is you're supposed to be given life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It never says you can be deprived of that, which is interesting as is, because if we look at that, we would state that that this point of life would essentially be that essentially no one can be get taken away life by law as is. And this is a very, very interesting point, is you can, and it even shows that you can actually argue this on the point of, is either argument could even argue on the point of, when we get to the argument of abortion. Abortion is essentially depriving of life, because you're talking a separate DNA of an individual. You're depriving of life without due process of law. Now, it doesn't matter if you believe in the fact of the Declaration of Independence definition of they're not allowed to deprive of life in any situation, or not being able to deprive without due process of law. Essentially, abortion is illegal in either sense, because the fact is we have not even seen the basic standard of due process. A fetus has not been given due process, nor been actually charged. They have not even been given the charge of crime of what they have actually done under the law. And that's the whole point of where we can actually argue that point, then that's one of those interesting things right there. But when it comes down to this, is you cannot have your stuff taken under that law. Now it says the last part, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This is what we call eminent domain. Now it's very, very specific when it says public use. This is very, very specific in what it's referring to. This is why we call about eminent domain abuses. When it's saying public use, it's not saying public good in what a lot of people have tried to term it as. It's saying public use. This means such as things as a park, a road, could be a government building, could be multiple things like that. But it does not mean giving one from one private user to another, such as taking one private house and giving it to a pharmaceutical company. That does not count as public use, because there is no public use to that building. There is only what you can claim public good, but you cannot claim public use. And the term use is very, very specific. When we go over to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you'll actually go over here and you'll look up the term use. Is the act or practice of employing something, the facts or state of matter of being used, the method or manner of employing or applying something. So basically it would go under 1b, the fact or state of being used. And when we look under this, it says public use, of being used by the public. The fact or state of being used, or essentially being used by the public. And when we start to look at this, what that would be, is we see that doesn't fit under the terminology. We see that they could maybe use the terminology of public good, but not public use. And it doesn't matter if they're saying they're doing just compensation. That is completely not legitimate to the point, because they have not met the standard of public use at that point on it. Now you can do that on the point of, let's say, a gas pipeline, because you can say that is public use, because that is serving the public in the transfer of such things as fuels. And that is a completely different case. You can do it such things as a border fence that is serving a public use, such as a road would, but both those would be equal to like the same situation as a road would. But you cannot claim that a private enterprise such as a pharmaceutical corporation receiving a building is of the same likelihood, because it may serve a public good, but it's not going to serve a public use. That would be the same thing as, doesn't matter if we're talking Pfizer or if we're talking Amazon or what other corporation we're talking about. You can't do that, because that doesn't fall under the idea of eminent domain. That falls under the idea of eminent domain abuses. And when we look under this, we see the fact is we might even consider the fact is on some of these things is to be put twice in jeopardy. When we look back on this, we might look under the idea of twice in jeopardy. When we look at that part, we might see that several cases might be under this law, because the fact is when we look at the case of, let's take for instance the O.J. Simpson case. we must take the actual outcome of that as actual fact when entering that into the debate of what we're actually determining on a civil case. When we assume that he's essentially, let's assume that he's essentially innocent on that. We're not going to go into the actual what people feel on either way of the case. We're going to go with he's innocent. Now we're going to go on the civil case based on those essential facts. Now they're saying that he bears then responsibility for it. Now he was essentially divorced at that time, or either divorced or separated at that time from Nicole Brown. Ronald Goldman was I guess who she was dating at that time. So I believe they were divorced by that time. And let's take that to another point. So they're trying to make the case that if there was any homicide, that he was responsible for the protection of these two individuals. A person who he basically had no type of reasoning to protect, and a person who was his ex-wife, who theoretically would basically have a minimal reason to protect at best. But basically, since this person was, since Goldman was the new person that was supposed to take the role of that as a fiance, theoretically he should have been the new role of protector for her. Thus, all likelihood is that his role of protector of that whole situation should have been negated. Thus, the idea that he bears responsibility for it is illegitimate unless you're denying the fact of the outcome of the first case. And this is why we get to the point of stating what happened in the first case is very, very crucial. And unless you're basically stating you're going to, as we say right here, try them for these, essentially use these civil cases to try them for the same point, which is essentially put them in jeopardy of life or limb for the same exact thing. You're essentially saying we don't like the outcome of this case, so we're going to try them again. Now, it does not state any basis of criminal case. It does not separate the idea of criminal case from, in this specifics, from civil case in this actual step right here. That's why it uses the what it called nor shall, as basically saying it says there's another exception on this as well, meaning that basically it's saying that no case shall be put, that no person shall be put into double jeopardy, meaning they're not supposed to be tried twice in any such manner, no matter what type of case. And it doesn't matter if you try to switch the case, you cannot try them as the likelihood. And it doesn't matter if you like the outcome of the first case or not, you cannot change it. You would essentially have to accept the outcome of the case as is. The fact is there was no the evidence as tried did not support the case. There was still enough reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury, and thus you have to accept the outcome of the case. This is why when we have smart prosecution, we understand that basically they know that you can't do this. And that's why they will not, under any circumstances, try a case unless they have that full confidence, because they know a person could easily get off without that. Now, obviously, you're going to have different rules when it says over here, refers to the idea of basically military tribunals. Was making the reference to that, but that's a complete and utter different case, and those fall under different, complete and utter different rules that are set by the military itself, and those will basically always be illustrated in any type of military handbook, and can basically be adjusted per the current standards. But basically, when it comes down to it, usually they're within some type of basic standard of the Constitution. They'll just make some type of alterations for the actual code of conduct for military actions. And when it comes down to this, is the main part of this, which needs to be understood, is that people need to understand that this is basically what is not really being understood is that we're kind of using these civil cases to pursue people that really shouldn't be pursued because they don't like the outcome of a case. That's number one. And number two is, regardless if the outcome of the case was right or not, and we're always going to have those cases that are not going to have the right outcome. The idea is it's better to let a guilty person go free than let an innocent person go to jail. I'd rather have that all day long. And then the last part that we need to understand is that the idea is, what we get is the fundamentals behind the Miranda rights, and that is very, very key. So people don't have to incriminate themselves, and it follows basically from all points, where they do not have to incriminate themselves at all levels. From before a charge has actually been made, that's even pre-arrest, to all the way on to actually the system within the courts. And this is very important, so they can actually protect themselves from the actual from being forced to state anything against their own free will. And this is where we've had some of these cases thrown out because of forced confessions. Because when you start forcing confessions, those are not admissible in court. And if you refuse to give them their rights, those will also not be admissible in court. And we've seen a lot of those cases thrown out, and a lot of people released because of those cases, because of that. When they start asking for their lawyer, and you tell them no, and you just keep pressing them with it. We've seen cases throughout the United States of people doing this, and they refuse. You'll see basically a lot of these people, because there was a case with a real crooked cop in Chicago. This is a while back, well over a decade ago. And don't assume this with the same cases, the Jussie Smollett, where they treated him with kid gloves and wanted to make sure they did that 100% right, where he was basically treated basically with 100% respect. Next to some of the other cases, like the Roger Stone case, which is almost questionable, to where if that is even constitutional, what he's gone through. But what this case back is with that one was the cop was eventually removed from the force, and the cop was arrested and sent to jail for using a taser for forced confessions. And this is why we need this Fifth Amendment on there, because of when we have abusive officers out there trying to force confessions. Because people are going to say, oh, we need to basically just get the guilty people off the street no matter what. Well, it's better to have those guilty people out there, because you're going to put a lot, because if we say we need them off the street no matter what, you're going to have an overly aggressive cop that's going to say, I just want a confession no matter what. And they're basically going to get a bunch of innocent people in prison regardless of what the issue is, and they're going to send a bunch of innocent people to prison that did nothing. They were basically wrong place, wrong time, and they're sitting in prison around a bunch of horribly violent people just for the crime of being in the wrong place, wrong time, hanging around the wrong people, and they're basically told that they're going to keep getting zapped with a taser until they say the exact right thing, and they're going to be going to jail for a long time, 20, 30, 40 years, because of this, because that cop wanted to get that conviction under his belt for just more notch on his belt. And that's what you're going to find out there. What you find out there is you're going to find people that basically they just want that win on their side, and it's a win-loss record with a lot of people, and they're not worried about justice. They're worried about the win-loss record. And this comes with police. It also comes with the people in the Justice Department. One of the people that rings to mind when I think of the Justice Department is Kamala Harris. She didn't care about who she sent to prison. She didn't care about what she was doing to keep people in prison. They were innocent. She just did not want to relinquish that win-loss record. And that was one of those people that totally cared about that win-loss record above all else. And when she says she's for the idea of criminal justice reform and she's for the legalization of drugs, that couldn't be further from the truth. When you look at her actual record as the actual Attorney General of the state of California, you look at her record, it is one of the worst for human rights. She was the absolute worst. She sent people to prison for crimes they never committed. She would when they tried to appeal these cases and say, I didn't do it, and here's the actual evidence to prove it, she would go to the judge and say, you can't let this person free. And basically she would go through and make these fraudulent forms out to basically essentially keep them in prison. And this is a person that would do this and work with these dirty cops to do this in the state of California. And when she says, I'm for criminal justice reform and ending the war on drugs, she's lying to you. When people like that, she's one of the ones that basically was completely against things like the Fifth Amendment. She's one of the biggest violators of the Constitution. You can see when people are saying, "Oh, I don't like Jeff Sessions because he was a big drug warrior, but I like Kamala Harris." Well, Kamala Harris was more of a drug warrior than Jeff Sessions could ever dream of being. Nobody could be more of a drug warrior than she was. That's why her father called her out and saying she was basically full of BS when she was trying to act like she was one of these people smoking weed when she's never done anything of the sort, when she was completely clean-laced and trying to, and she was one of these people that was about putting people away that ever did drugs to begin with, and she wanted to basically hang them, and that this was always her attitude. She always had this attitude of basically hanging these people, and regardless of what the evidence would show. And this is why we have amendments like this, is to protect these people from people like Kamala Harris and people like Jeff Sessions and other insane drug warriors like that. We have it like that. We have it to protect against that. We have it to protect against the NSA and the FISA and against these other abusive systems, because we don't need these rules that are against liberty. And when people go out there, such as AOC, saying that the Constitution is outdated and the Constitution is racist, they're completely and utterly insane. This is the Constitution that protects these people from going to jail if we're actually applied right. When these people actually violate the Constitution in government, because we have such a large government, this is what causes these problems. What ends up freeing these people is the Constitution, the actual document that they say is racist and bigoted. Now, if you like this podcast, like it, subscribe, click the notification bell, share a little bit around social media with your friends, and share it publicly. And if you are inclined make a donation on Patreon. I would really appreciate it. It would mean a lot to me. And that's about it. Thank you, everybody.